man is Alan Eggers. We're doing a interview with Lileah Harris, the wife of Dr. Percy G. Harris. Lileah, tell us when and where you were born.
I was born in Waterloo. Do you need the exact date? That's totally...
No.
Well,
what year were you
1931.
born? 1931?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Born in Waterloo. My father was a physician, practiced in Waterloo.
Born in a hospital or at home?
I was born in a hospital, St. Francis.
And your folks, where did they originate from?
My father was from Texas. Grew up in... Well, he was born in a little town in Texas, but he mainly lived in Austin until he came to Iowa to go to college.
Was any of your distant relatives slaves, as far as you know? Or?
My grandmother, my father's mother, was born a slave, but she was a very little girl when slavery ended, and we never really talked enough about that. I wish, I don't really. Her father was her owner. He was not a big plantation owner. I think he was a storekeeper, but he had a few slaves. And the thing when we've tried to do genealogy, we haven't quite figured out who really raised her, what family. She evidently went and lived with a family, but we don't, that's one part of her history I'd like to know more about. Her picture's in there on the wall.
I normally ask about your dad's occupation, but you said he was a doctor in Waterloo.
Family practice.
Did he go around and make house calls?
I think almost all doctors did it back in the 30s. And,
your mother, did she work outside of the home?
Not until after he died. She taught school after my father died. He died when he was quite young.
Did she have a college education?
She'd had 2 years. They met at Iowa. She'd had 2 years of college. She finished up. When he died, she went to Iowa State Teachers College and got a teaching certificate first. You could have a 2 years, and then she went in the summers until she got her degree. So she did get a degree, but when she was she was older.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had 2 older sisters and a younger brother, one brother. And
what was their names?
My oldest sister's name was Martha Ann, and she's no longer living. And then the next sister, Betty Jean, is living. My brother died too a few years ago. Lee Jr. He was named after my father, Lee Burton Jr. And my baby sister is still living and lives in Cedar Falls.
Where'd you go to school, grade school?
A school called Grant School in Waterloo.
Was it segregated?
No, they didn't have segregated public schools, but it happened to be in the part of town where most of the African Americans lived. So we had a much larger than normal black student population. I would say it was close to 30%. But no, it was a mixed, the majority were still white. But my teachers were all white. So.
It was a public school, it wasn't it?
It was a public school. I didn't go to Catholic school. My younger brother and sister later went to Catholic school. Catholic school was segregated. I should throw that in. While public schools were, they did not even want, they wanted to have a mission and have black Catholics, but they didn't want them to go to the churches. And they built a church, and we went to a mission church called St. Peter Claver. That doesn't exist anymore.
In Waterloo.
My father actually went to talk to Archbishop Rollman in Dubuque to dissuade him from building a school. He said no one would be, when the public schools were integrated, no one would think of sending their children to a segregated Catholic school. And so they didn't do that. But
did you have when you were going to grade school, later life you acquired a great love of music. Did you have that when you was in grade school, that love of music?
I was playing the piano, picking melodies out when I was about 4 years old. So my mother played and sang, loved music. She wasn't really a singer, but she would entertain us. And she started teaching me. And then by the time I was in kindergarten, she found a teacher for me. So I had
Growing up, Lileah, Christmas, was that a fun time in your household?
Well, it was a very special time.
Do you remember any favorite Christmases that stuck out in your mind as a
No,
child?
not really. I just have an overall. One big thing was that my mother always made the Southern eggnog. My father there were certain things he liked from the South. White cake with coconut frosting and pecans all over it. And I think about the foods. My mother always made homemade caramels. And Carnation Dairy used to give all the doctors eggnog for Christmas, but it was a base, really. And then my mother would doctor it up with everything, including some bourbon. And and after the presents were open, we always got a little glass of this eggnog, no matter what our age. So we had a very happy Christmas, I guess.
Was there toys? I imagine. Could your dad afford to buy you toys?
Oh, he was practicing. It was a depression, but still, we were certainly a lot better off than many people. And I was the baby for about 6 years, and they had one reason I have the name I do, the Lileah, is to get his name, Lee, in my name. My mother had a stillborn baby, and lost another. I guess she had a miscarriage, and I think she had at least one stillborn baby between my sister Betty Jean and me. And I often got boys' toys, which I did not ask for. I remember I had a little mechanical train. I always wanted a horse. A real horse, and one Christmas they gave me a toy horse, and I guess the story is that I cried because I said I meant a real horse. But I loved horses, and as a child.
Was you close to your dad?
My dad was so busy. I mean, we wanted to be close to him, but he was so busy that I didn't really. And he was a little reserved. He was a very serious man, and with his friends, he had friends that he played cards with and that sort of thing, and you'd see him relax, but he was just rather serious and not demonstrative. His way of showing affection is if you were lying on the floor reading the comic strips, on the paper or something, he would, pretend he was going to step on you, things like that, which I thought was, but it wasn't. My parents really weren't hugging and kissing.
He had a hard time expressing his love.
Right.
Did he?
But he and I became very close just because of some conversations we had just before he died. I had an opportunity to get to visit him when he was sick.
A one-on-one with him.
Mm-hmm.
Did he get paid a lot in produce?
A little bit during the Depression. Farmers, especially, he had quite a few farm patients, and a lot of people were just didn't have money, and in those days, doctors took care of people, whether they had money or not. And later on, when World War II began and things were rationed, we would still have people who would give us cream. We'd make our own butter when butter was rationed. And patients would call. We've got some green beans ready. Why don't you send a couple of kids down to pick the beans or pick the raspberries or we used to get a lot of that, pick the strawberries. So we were the little crew that got to do those things.
Could he afford to buy you fairly decent clothes?
Oh, we had very nice clothes, but my mother did sew. My mother made a lot of our clothing, and I was a chubby little girl, and the only place you could buy dresses for chubby little girls near us was to come down. We occasionally would come down to the old Armstrong store here in Cedar Rapids, and they had you could get a chubby size, and so for special occasions I would get a few things here. And then my father was a big, tall man. He wore a big shoe that you couldn't get every place, so that was part of the reason too. They'd come here to buy his shoes, and but my mother did make most of our dresses.
You had mentioned the fact that your dad wanted the children to always look sharp.
Because he was, there were only 2 black professionals in Waterloo, my father and the attorney that persuaded him to come there to practice. And, in those days, and having grown up in the South also, where you were taught your dignity was always important no matter how you were treated. And, we were always kept very spick and span, I had the reputation for loving to live in the sandbox, but the thing that in the summer, even when we were out of school, the thing that my mother, I don't know how my mother did it, because she did have a hired girl as things went, as her family got bigger. But I mean, she washed and ironed and starched, and she did my father's office linen, his office coats. You know, in those days they didn't have the disposable sheets, all of that stuff. I can just remember her. You know, the wash days were something, and she had help. She had someone help iron. I guess she did have someone iron, but we had to be clean. I mean, the incentive to get cleaned up was that my dad would take us with him when he made house calls. We'd get to ride along.
Did you get to go once in a while?
Oh yeah, especially in the summer when there was no school. We would stay in the car. But he would let us ride along with him.
Was your mom a good cook?
Yeah, she was.
Did she know? She did a lot of Southern cooking.
My mother really was born in Des Moines, but she spent a lot of her childhood in Missouri, Sedalia, Missouri, is where her mother was from. And my grandmother had a job. I don't know a whole lot about the chronology of this, but I know that for a while she worked for a stock theater company. There was a Princess Theater in Des Moines, and these now people don't know these names, but Conrad Nagel, who became a famous Hollywood actor, and Fay Bainter were both part of that old Princess Theater. And I think that was probably one of the reasons my mother was with an aunt in Missouri quite a bit, because she had to travel with the theater. And had other jobs where she couldn't have my mother with her, I guess. But
did she teach you how to cook as a young girl?
I liked to cook always as a kid. My grandmother was the real cook. My grandmother, my mother's mother, not that I really didn't get along with, but had to. I'll just say that she wasn't very kind to me as a child. I had to share a room with her until we moved to another house, and she didn't like you to be in the kitchen with her. She wasn't very patient, but she cooked for wealthy people. She cooked for the Head family. He was the head of John Deere's back then, and she usually lived with him during the week and cooked, and then she would come home on weekends or whatever she had.
She just didn't like young children.
She wasn't very patient.
Under feet.
Yeah.
Were you allowed to play? Did you have neighborhood kids that you played with?
Yeah, a few. The first house we lived in, we were sort of on the edge of town. It was the edge of town then. But a couple of blocks away, there were, the kids we went to school with. And, yes, I had some, my buddies.
When thinking back, was there,
My early childhood was pretty lonely, though, because I was, as far as playmates, I was the youngest in our family. And there was a period when I didn't really, until I started school, I didn't have playmates. They tell me I was pretty imaginative. I may have had pretend friends. And my grandmother, the Texas grandmother, the one I really was crazy about, who lived with us until my brother was born when I was about 5 or 6, I guess. And when she went back to Texas, and she used to take me when she'd go visiting. So I would always be sitting with the old ladies and listening to their conversation.
So you had to entertain yourself and think of things to entertain yourself.
And I played a lot. I played the piano a lot. I was when I was very little. Second grade, old enough to write. I made a schedule for myself. I had everything on my schedule. Even when I brushed my teeth, I would write down the time. And I always practiced before school and after school. So.
Did you have any close friends that you stayed close throughout your lifetime?
No, not this. I had different friends when I went to junior high and high school. I had a good little buddy in elementary school, and she was white. And then when we went to junior high, the social situation then was that whites and blacks did not mix socially, really, at that age. So our friendship, it just ended. It was very, very traumatic. I mean, it just was. She and I were both had similar interests, and we were considered bright kids. And I was the captain of the patrol, the patrol that when you cross the street.
She probably couldn't understand any easier than you could as to why you couldn't continue to be friends.
But she and I were pretty much inseparable, at one period, and then junior high changed. I had different friends than after junior high.
Did your dad? Did you ever go on outings, or did you travel?
We traveled a lot. Yes, we did take family trips and to see our family friends and relatives, and my father thought it was important for us to meet some of the friends that had been educated with them, college-educated people, because in Waterloo there weren't many African Americans who'd had that opportunity. And he just wanted us to realize there was a black middle class, even though Waterloo was a working people's town, so we were exposed to.
How about on Sundays? Did he ever take you on Sunday drives?
Yeah, a little bit probably in the summer, although that was especially when we were younger. I think as we got older, my big thing, the thing I wanted to do on Sunday was go to a movie generally, and we had to go to mass. We had to go to church, and on Sunday there wasn't a lot of cleaning to do, but we had certain little chores that we had to do, and if we did all those things, then we could go to a movie. We had allowances, so everything had to come out of our. Movies probably were 10 cents though, never more than a quarter, I'm sure.
Did you swim? Did you have any place to swim in the summer?
We went to the YW. Yeah, my mother was on the board for the YWCA. Ku
Klux Klan. Any
well,
memories?
I heard about them in the news, and I'd heard people talk. I guess I had two big fears as a child: the Ku Klux Klan, and I was afraid of being kidnapped because I heard about the Linn kidnapping. My mother would always reassure me, "We do not have enough money for you to worry about being kidnapped." But my father, the house that we lived in was in a neighborhood that had never had, blacks living there. It was kind of on the edge of town, but there was a cross, just a little cross that was made in the wet cement, and I was always told that the Ku Klux Klan had done that, but I don't know how true that was.
About gypsies, did you ever recall
Yes.
your parents talking about gypsies?
Well, they came to our house because they were sometimes looking for medical care. They would, and dressing up like a gypsy for Halloween was one of my favorite costumes because I could put makeup on and wear jewelry. My grandmother had lots of jewelry. She had a box in her room, a beautiful pearl box, and I don't know where she got all this jewelry, but having been a theater person, probably.
Did your dad ever comment about treating the gypsies not getting paid, or you don't ever recall him saying anything?
No.
So,
and he probably wasn't home when they were looking for. His office was downtown, but they would come because sometimes they would just come to try to.
Okay, so you said you're interested in music, and the piano started. You started playing around. Your mother started exposing you to the piano around the age of 4 years old.
Well, the piano was there, and the kids I just liked to play it, and I could pick out melodies. And
then did your mother sign you up for piano lessons, or
she found a teacher for me? Yes, a teacher in Waterloo.
Would she come into your home, or would you have?
No, I had to went to her home.
Mm-hmm. And did you were you ever asked to give recitals, or?
Mrs. Parrott was their name, Ellen Law Parrott. She was also an organist at one of the big churches in Waterloo. But she, at first I was in her recitals. She had recitals, but I don't really know when this, I was in 4th grade when I stopped taking lessons from her. So she didn't want to put a black child. I was her only black student. And she decided it was not good for her building her clientele to have me in the recitals. And so I don't know that whole story. I was too young, but my mother wasn't going to have me take lessons from somebody who wouldn't put me in the recital. And I had really, at my elementary school, we had some wonderful teachers, and one of them who, if 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade were departmentally taught, and the teacher that taught the enrichment, they called it the enrichment subjects, the arts, literature, music, and art, had gone to Iowa State Teachers College and studied with a pretty well-known teacher there named Lileah Rignitz, and she talked to my mother about the possibility of me just auditioning with her and taking lessons at the college, because she had a few pupils who were not college students.
So how did you get to Cedar Falls from Waterloo?
There was an interurban. I got on the streetcar. I got out of school early, took the bus downtown, and transferred. And I was about 9 years old. It wasn't that But I did that as I said, from the time I was in 4th grade and then I ended up going to college there because my dad died that summer, and I still studied with Ms. Rignitz for a couple of years.
Did your dad give you allowance?
Our parents did, yeah. But,
So you would have money to go to movies?
Probably was given to us by our mother, but it was from the parents. Yeah, we had to budget. I didn't have any terrific expenses. I mean, out of a quarter, it was a dime for the movie and a nickel for church and a nickel for... I don't think And then in junior high, we did get more because they started having hot lunch programs, and we were not close to the school anyway. In junior high, we were close to elementary school, I think they included... I can't remember for sure. I think they included our lunch money with our allowance. But...
do you remember your folks ever taking you to Mass on... midnight Mass on Christmas Eve?
No. The first time I ever went to midnight Mass was after I was married in Washington, D.C. I don't even know if there was a midnight Mass in Waterloo, but I wasn't aware of it.
Did I know different people I've talked to would, because of the black entertainers, when they would come to Cedar Rapids, they weren't allowed to stay in hotels and everything, and some of the more affluent black people would put them up, room and board. Did your folks ever do that in Waterloo?
Yeah, a few times, and the one that was most prominent and that I remember the best was Paul Robeson. Mm-hmm. And at the time he had been a concert singer and also starred in a production of Othello, but at the time he came to stay with us, he was running with Henry Wallace as vice president on the Progressive Party ticket. And the hotels wouldn't keep him, so we, often if you had a fairly decent home or were a prominent citizen, they would ask if we, and there were a couple of others. A woman not as well known from Chicago, but a beautiful voice, Etta Moulton was her name.
That give the children some exposure to
yes, right. Well, it was a wonderful opportunity to meet, and then Paul Robeson's accompanist was with him, and he was very encouraging about my piano. He listened to me play and talked to my parents about what he thought they should do to help me. And I had a lot of our family friends were that way. We had a doctor in Des Moines, Dr. Scales, who was a close friend of my dad's, loved music, and people like that would do everything they could to encourage me. He had me. There was a young black woman who was a child prodigy, Demita Jo, and not Demita Jo. Demita Jo is somebody else totally. Let me get the right name. Oh. Demita Jo was a girl I met in Texas. Philippa Schuyler. She was from a mixed marriage. Her mother was white, and her father was the publisher of a black newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier. And her mother set out to prove that this was a superior child when she had it, because of the mixed marriage. But I had a chance to meet her because she was playing in Des Moines, and she was staying with the Scales, the man I just mentioned, Dr. Scales, and they had me come down and stay there and go to the recital, but also to have a chance to meet her, be around her. But she was so protected by her mother that you could barely. She had her on a very special diet. She cooked her food very. Very regimented routine. So I got to be in the same house with her, but I didn't really.
Was your dad into sports?
Yes, my dad was unlike my sons, he was a White Sox fan. But he had, when he was in college, he ran on the railroad as a dining car waiter in the summer. That was his summer job. It was a good paying job for a black guy. And he ran from Chicago to Seattle. And I guess that's where he picked up his love for the...
Did you say he went to UNI?
No, I was to the University.
University of Iowa. Mm-hmm. Was he into football at the University of Iowa?
No, but he had a good. He was a friend of Duke Slater, who was a very famous football player at Iowa. My father was not athletic at all. He played a little golf after, but he was a little heavy set, and I don't remember. He got to the point where he would make himself walk for his health. He had a heart problem.
You had mentioned the fact that he attended quite a few football games.
Well, but a lot of that was the social part too. We went to the games, but it was also
he would take
a chance for him to see. He took the whole family because I had an aunt in Iowa City.
Would you take the Krandic down there then?
No, well, sometimes he would. Sometimes they would drive down, but we would. Okay, as we got older, into our teens, we wanted to be there with the college atmosphere and so on. So they would sometimes let us go down Friday after school and stay with my aunt overnight, and then they would drive down on Saturday.
Did you ever recall the knothole section?
Yes, it was 25 cents.
That's where he
at the end of the field. There were bleachers. There were bleachers then. It wasn't, the field wasn't like it is. Yeah, that's where we sat. I was probably more interested in the popcorn than the game. But
were the boys?
Well, there weren't boys.
Too young.
There weren't boys. We were sitting with kids our age, but I was aware that there were college boys, but they thought of me as being too young for them, I'm sure.
So where'd you go to high school?
Waterloo East.
Waterloo East, and what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 48. Yeah. I should have graduated a year later, 49, but I decided in junior high that I wanted to no longer be a midterm student, and I had a friend who was going to be a half year ahead of me, and I went to summer school at West High. You could do that, and took the 3 courses I needed to take: English, science, and math. So I was a half year ahead and went to high school. High school was 10th, 11th, and 12th.
Were you into sports in high school? No. Later, when you in your last 2 years, sophomore or junior and senior years, did you have a social life? Did the kids go dancing or go to dance? Did you go?
We had
to
school
dances?
parties. I always went to school parties, but there were only a handful of black kids in my class. Like I had really basically 2 male friends who were more like brothers than anything else, and then 2 female friends, and that were close. And then we had a little group slightly larger. But our social life was mainly going to each other's homes, and one of the guys, Don Comack, was a good the boys were both good athletes actually, but he liked to sing, and I would play the piano. They'd stand around the piano. It really sounds old. The kids think it sounds funny, but that's what we did. He'd sing popular tunes, and I'd play. Sometimes we'd make fudge or whatever.
Was there? Did teenagers date back then when they was our juniors and freshmen? Did they?
No. I think I don't remember. The first time I went any place and I had to it was a college, but my father gave me permission to go to. Well, Percy took me to. He was at. I was still in high school. I remember he took me to Oklahoma. The Oklahoma came to Waterloo, the stage show, and he took me to see it. But I can't remember. I think he was already at Iowa State Teachers then. He was ahead of me, but not much dating now.
Was your father very protective as to whose home?
Well, we were. No, I don't think girls dated as early. I was sort of young because I was 17 when I graduated from high school, and I had a lot of friends. And as I said, yes, I did. There were some college boys that I thought were neat, but I wasn't around them, so it was a pretty safe thing. They were in school, and I was in Waterloo.
Did any of the high school students have cars then?
The one that I remember for sure is Jean Rath, who was the daughter of the people that owned the Rath Pancake Company. And when I learned to drive, occasionally my mother would let me drive to school, but not regularly. We walked to school. My father would. It was not a terribly long walk, but some people took the bus. But he thought it was good for us, and he always made his hospital rounds early. Then he would go back home and get breakfast after that. And if he passed us by on the way to the office, he just waved. He never picked us up.
How about drinking and smoking? Did any kids ever try that when they was in high school?
Some did, but not like they do now. And people were not. It was considered. It was kind of shocking if you heard about somebody smoking. Wasn't that much aware of that. My group, nobody in my group did that. So I didn't.
I thought
my parents didn't either.
You were telling me that you and your girlfriend used to try weeds.
Oh no, my sister.
Your sister?
My sister. we lived there was a field next to us where were weeds, and we heard that, and one of them happened to be marijuana, and we didn't, and I just could remember us putting this green weed into. We had a cousin, a very glamorous cousin from Kansas, I guess she was, Missouri or Kansas, and she smoked with in those days people didn't worry about lung cancer, and she smoked with a cigarette holder, very like the movie stars, and we thought it was very glamorous, so we would try to then smoke this weed, but it wasn't a regular thing. I didn't mean to give that.
No.
Once you try to do it, you wouldn't do it again.
So we'll get you out of high school. You graduated from high school, and then college. You went to college where then?
To the first 2 years, I was at Iowa State Teachers College. I took partly because of my father's death.
You remember what the tuition would have been?
$35 a quarter. And I think the room and board was $200 and something a quarter.
So when you got
my mother thought I should live. She thought it would be good for me to be on the campus. No, I could have gone. A lot of kids in Waterloo drove back and forth or used public transportation. I mean, they're like twin cities, like Marion and Cedar Rapids.
So when you entered college, your ambition was still to become
do something with my music.
Pianist.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever get into?
You didn't. You asked me in high school if I was in sports. I was in everything else but sports. I was considered a very active student, a student leader. I was whenever there was and in music, I was in. I both sang in the choir and accompanied the choirs, and I was often put in leadership positions for things in high school. So
you were a leader, and did you pursue your musical career? Did you ever get to the point where you did any concerts or?
I gave a couple of recitals by myself as a student. Instead of just being on a recital, I planned a whole program a couple of times. One in junior high and one in high school. And,
when you were in college, you lost your dad, didn't you?
He died before I went to college. He died right after I graduated. He died the summer after I graduated from high school.
How old was he?
In 48.
40. What? How old was he?
49.
49 years old. What did he die of?
Well, the final cause of death. He had a stroke. But he'd had a high blood pressure and a heart condition, and he had gone up to Mayo Clinic a few times, and they told him that he needed to not work for a while. He was going to take a month off. Actually, we had planned a family trip to California, driving to California that summer, and his problem was finding another doctor to come in and take his practice while he was gone, and he finally found a doctor who'd gone to Meharry Medical College. That's a black medical school in Tennessee. And he just made those arrangements when he had the stroke. And so he lived for a while after that, but he was, I always have to ask my husband what the final cause of death was, because my husband is the one that's done all the family genealogy. He has everybody's records and
Was it a heart?
There was some other complication. No, it was
a lot of people of that age, they got sometime.
At 49? He was 49 when he died.
What am I trying to think of? Where it ruins your valves in your heart.
No, this was something more of some organ that's in your stomach, I think, or something, but I can't remember what it was. It's terrible not to remember that, but I can't.
So what year did you graduate then from college?
I didn't graduate. We got married. I had 2 years of college, and we had a blossoming romance.
I was going to ask you, has the boyfriend come on the scene yet?
Well, I had other boyfriends before we became serious. We were friends and had this. Actually, in college, we had pretty much the same group of friends.
Mm-hmm.
We were in plays. We were in a play together, and that sort of got us involved with kids who were interested in theater. And then I already had music friends, so we were kind of in the artsy group. And
so, where did you meet Percy? I assume you're talking about Percy.
I met him I knew him from the time he came to live with before that even. His aunt that he lived with part of the time after his parents died, his lived just a couple blocks down the street from us. So I knew who he was. I didn't know him well, though, until high school.
And then when did you bring him home to introduce him to your folks? Or?
No, I mean everybody knew who he was. It wasn't like that. I mean, he wasn't in a small town. And my father was his aunt's doctor, and he knew a lot about it. Probably knew more about him than I did. And there was a brief period in high school when I had a real crush on him, and he was walking home from school with me, but not much came out of that. And East High was famous for a show called the Swing Show each year, and it was a musical review sort of thing. And the year I was a sophomore, my first year in high school, he happened to be the director of the swing band. It was really comical because I guess they thought he had rhythm, but he wasn't really a musician. But he looked very glamorous directing with this little baton. Well, a lot of other girls thought he looked good too, but and then during that period he did. He said he liked me then. He said he insisted he did, but he did. I always thought he walked home from school with me. I always told him it was because our Waterloo Courier was delivered before his, and he could read the sports page. But he rarely came in the house. He used to just walk me home and sit on the front steps and look at the paper.
Did your dad approve of him?
Well, he thought it was too old for me. I mean, I was.
So when
I'm a city boy, he'd been living in Chicago too.
He had been to Chicago, exposed to the big city life, and thought maybe he'd be a little too fast for his daughter.
Right.
Back in those days, would he have needed your dad's permission to marry you, or was that earlier times?
No, probably. Except by the time I married him, my dad was not living. So
okay.
My dad died,
passed away.
And he became very close to my mother actually because he liked to even when I was he dropped out of college for 1 year and did some traveling, but when I was in Cedar Falls, sometimes he'd go visit at my house because, we had a pretty nice record collection class. He liked classical music. He always liked, and he liked to listen to. He'd do odd jobs for my mother. There were several. The other two boys in my gang were from poor families. Actually, my husband's aunt was pretty well off. I mean, she wasn't rich, but she was not poor. She was able to buy him a car. He had a car in high school, that sort of thing.
So when did you get married then?
We got married in 50.
What month you got married?
In July. Yeah.
Where was this a church that you got married at?
Right. It's a church at St. Peter Claver.
In Waterloo.
Mm-hmm. They've turned it into it's now a recreation center or something else. It's not used as a church anymore.
You got married, and you had 2 years of college education. Your first job?
Well, we had already decided what we were going to do. He was going to continue his education, and the emphasis was on him finishing at that point. And my mother was trying to figure out what was best for us, and we ended up going to Washington D.C. because I could at that time it was easy to. We thought I was a pretty good typist. Not that I'd ever worked as. I used to work for my dad a little bit in the office, but not typing. He would have me pull records and that sort of thing after school, pull people's records, and I used to love doing it because I could always have a Coke when I worked there. But,
so he had decided that he wanted to go into a medical profession of some type.
Well, he thought that's what he wanted to do. He had to finish undergraduate school first, and because of government jobs, I guess the Korean War had started. I think 1950, and they were pretty easy to get. And
so, were you working for one of the military branches?
I took the civil service test for typing, and my first job was working for the Army.
What was your pay? Do you remember?
I guess it was around $200 a month. I know my second job was later on. I worked for the Air Force at the Pentagon. I don't remember exactly, but barely enough to live on. I'll put it that way.
So where did he go to school then in Washington?
Howard University. Mm-hmm. That's where he went. He finished his undergraduate work there, and he picked up some courses at Catholic U and American U because of the fact that he was working while he was in school part of the time to help him get through, faster. Mm-hmm. But then and then he went to medical school there too.
So, and then after you were at the Department of the Army, did you get a job someplace else?
Well, I only worked until our first child was born. I had worked for just about 6 months really, and after Bruce was born, I didn't work again. Well, see, David and Bruce are only 22 months apart. I had another child, and but when he was closer to being ready, he had a job. He was working, but when we knew that he couldn't work in medical school because you can't go to, they didn't let you do that. You couldn't go to medical school and work. So that's when I tried to get another job and ended up working in the Department of the Air Force, the Pentagon.
In the Pentagon? Was that the same Pentagon we know as today? The same building? You must have had some pretty tight budget.
Yeah.
Living off of your income in a large city.
Yeah. And we, my mother tried to help us a little bit, but she really, of course, that's why she'd gone back to teach. You talk about people not paying you during the Depression. My father had a lot of money on the books.
Yeah.
A lot of money he hadn't collected.
Yeah.
And just before he died, too, had been paying college tuition for my older sisters who did go to school. They went to school in Alabama, so not the tuitions there were nothing like what kids are paying now, but still it was.
Did you have a piano?
Mm-hmm. I thought about this piano.
In Washington, is this?
But we bought one after we'd been there a while. I missed not having one, and one of my husband's teachers was he was a psychology professor, but he also was a part-time salesman at one of the piano companies, the Jordan Piano Company, where they sold Steinways actually. But we bought not this one. I had this one. This is one I had at home, and my mother always said, when you have your home, it's your piano. But we got the one in the family room we bought ourselves.
Could you afford any social life when you lived in Washington, D.C.?
Well, even if we could have afforded it, with taking care of, I was taking care of babies all the time. Yeah. So we couldn't. Yeah. We had. It was kind of like high school. We had friends, so we had college kids who came over who were friends of ours.
Partied back and forth.
Yeah. Well, not party, but I mean just get-togethers. Yeah, we weren't part.
Was Percy able to get any part-time jobs then later to help?
Well, when we first went there, he the first job that he got when we didn't have a child then was working in the priest's dining room at Georgetown University, and he was hired as a waiter, which paid pretty well actually. But the trays were really heavy. He had trouble with the trays, so he asked him if he could be a dishwasher instead. So he worked there as a dishwasher, and of course I was working for the Army for a while, so we were both working. But then he later on, I'm trying to remember when he got the job at Kenmore Apartments.
Did he ever mention about getting tips working as a waiter? Or that?
No, I don't think they did that. I doubt that they would do that. It wasn't a place where you paid for meals. It was just the priest's dining room where the meals were served. I don't think so. I know so. I would have known it. I'm trying to remember when he got the job at the Kenmore apartment building. It's hard for me to put it all together. Whenever he got this job, it sort of seems to me that it was in the summer, but then it wasn't the first summer, I don't think. No. He'll have to help you with that.
Yeah,
but anyway,
okay.
he answered an ad in the paper, actually, or called it like a housing, a place that, what would you call it, not a housing development, but anyway, there was an ad in the paper, and when he applied for this job, it was an elevator operator job, and he was looking for something he could do part-time and go to school, and at first he was told that the job wasn't available, but then the person that they thought they was going to take the job didn't take the job, and he got called. So that proved to be a very lucky break for us, because the woman who was managing the apartment building, Mrs. Guest, was originally from Iowa, or had lived in Iowa, and he was running the freight elevator when people were moving into this. It was a new building on 5700 block of Connecticut Avenue, and she found out he was a student, and she took a liking to him, and she set things up so that he had a table there, a card table, and a lamp so he could study. And he said she practically threatened people not to use the freight elevator when he was, I don't know how they were supposed to move in, but she said, remember, he's got to study. But it turned out that our senator was moving in the building. Senator Gillette was the senator from Iowa at that time, one of the senators. And she managed to work it out so that he had to deliver a package to them. She wanted him to meet, figure it out a way for them to meet. And Mrs. Gillette was so excited to see someone from Iowa, and so he got to meet them. Got to meet the senator later, I guess. And he said, "I'm going to help you get a better job," because he found out what we were trying to do. And it was a patronage job. He was able to get him on a janitor crew at in the Senate wing of the Capitol building. It was a night job. He worked at night, and so he didn't get much sleep. But he went to school in the daytime and worked at night, and that was a pretty good paying job. But he couldn't keep that after med school.
Evidently, he was a very likable young man that...
He could be.
when he wants to be. So, when did he get his medical degree?
57.
1957. Mm-hmm. And then where did you go from there?
Well, by then we were... The big hurdle of getting your education was a big thing, and they had the intern.
And the next thing would be an internship.
Right, and they had the matching program. They still do that, I guess. You apply, you try to find places you think that will work for you, and there's a matching program. Whether they choose you or you choose, I don't know how it works. Yeah. But anyway, he had heard about the fact that there was going to be one available at St. Luke's. Mercy had a black intern the year before he graduated, and St. Luke's was going to do it, but then they decided to wait and see how it worked out for Mercy. So they hadn't had one before, but anyway, they decided to take him as an intern, and it was a paying internship. A lot of internships at that time didn't pay. They didn't pay. They might have had a stipend, but everything seems like I'm saying is $200 a month, but I think that's about what it was. And they also supplied us with a house because of the size of our families. St. Luke's supplied the housing, and they had three or four other interns that had really good several children. We weren't the only ones. We had 4 children when we came here, and but they couldn't find a place for us. It was hard to find a place to rent for us. And so St. Luke's let us, racial thing.
Because of the racial.
Right.
Did you find Cedar Rapids, did you find there was still quite a bit of segregation in the Cedar Rapids area when
not in
57?
Not in just routine things, but
there still was
a lot of housing discrimination. Yeah. Yes, there was a lot of when we were trying to find a house, we ran into a lot of.
So where did they find you a place down by St. Luke's?
No, they owned at that time there were houses on A Avenue, and they owned the house, which is now. Everything is so different over there. The women's center and the parking ramp, none of that was there then. But yes, it was a house that belonged to St. Luke's that they had used for. I think they used it for practical nursing classes or something. And it was a 2-story house. It wasn't real big, but had a nice finished basement because they used the basement. So the basement was nice enough, and with a bathroom, or at least a toilet down there. So we put our older boys downstairs, and then there were two small bedrooms upstairs. One was just big enough for a crib, really. So it was just, and then we had a bed on the main floor.
So when Percy first took this internship, was he required to put in a lot of hours?
Well, just the general routine that they have to go through. I mean, we were living, it was to our advantage that we were living right across from the hospital. Some of them were living in other parts of town. So he was often called because the nurses there were no emergency room doctors in those days as we have them now. And if something came up and they couldn't get a doctor there in a hurry, he would sometimes get called because they knew he was right across the street. So
he was on call.
Well, not officially, but I don't remember what his schedule was. I know that there are times when but there were other things too, because we could eat meals at the hospital dining room at a reduced. The interns got a special price for meals, so sometimes our Sunday dinner was just taking the family over to St. Luke's and having dinner out. It was just.
Did you find yourself getting involved in community?
Well, gradually. At first, I was probably not doing much when I had twin babies and 4 other children.
What year was that?
The twins were born during his internship.
Yeah.
And,
in 1958?
Yes, right.
And that would have made, 6 children
6,
by then?
Right. And then in 59, at the end of 59, I had another child. But Bruce was going to Immaculate Conception School at first.
Well,
and then I changed him to public school.
We might as well stop, and you can just rattle off the dates. And Alan will play the camera on their picture. This would be a good place to pick up their birthday and their name.
And I'm trying to remember if this was my birthday or my husband's birthday. Is it some occasion?
Why don't you, starting in the back row from the left to the right, what's their names?
This is not a recent picture, so they all look a little bit different. But starting in the back row on the left is my oldest daughter, Lileah, and next is Paul. He has a twin brother. Paul. Do you want me to say something about them? What they do?
No, you don't have to.
And Matthew, and then Philip, who is the other twin. And here we have one who's not a Harris. That's my daughter-in-law, Claire, Philip's wife. He was the only one married at that time. And Peter. All right, in the middle row, kneeling is Mark, and then my oldest son, Bruce, and believe it or not, that's me, and my husband, and then my second oldest son, David, and my youngest boy, Grant. And in the very front row, we have the other 3 girls, Sarah on the left, Rebecca in the middle, and Anne.
Did you want a big family? Did you ever think about it, or did you just let the
Yes,
Lord
I did.
take
I mean, I don't think I gave it deep thought, but I always thought it'd be fun to have a big family. Well, there were 5 of us, which for a lot of people thought was a big family, but I thought it'd be fun to have boys. I only had one brother, and he was a bit spoiled, and for some reason I thought, and my sisters and I didn't always get along, so I thought maybe boys would be easier. But I always thought I wanted 7 children. I didn't expect to have 12.
When they were all teenagers, when the boys were all teenagers, did you still have that feeling you wish to have all boys?
I think boys are easier to get along
really?
with.
Did
yes,
you?
Yeah. I mean, I got along with them more easily than the girls sometimes.
Did you have household help in raising this brood?
Gradually, I started having more help. Even when he was interning, I had twins and 4 other kids, so it was really, I didn't really. What happened was that my husband decided I needed a little help, and I don't remember how he discovered Mrs. Sasek, but she used to come over. Maybe every day when they were real little, but mainly to clean bathrooms and scrub the kitchen floor. Just a few things to help me out. That first year, the interns' wives were very close-knit. We were good. We were very friendly with each other and got together with our children. And often one of them would just come over and just wash a few dishes because I had such a big family and I just had twin babies. And my husband helped a lot with the twins. He helped. I mean, if I was trying to nurse one, he would hold the other one so they wouldn't cry.
How many? In later years, how many would have been home at the same time?
Well, for some time I think I've been telling people 8, but I think it's probably 10. Bruce graduated from high school in 69, I guess, and my oldest son. And Matthew was born in 68. And Matthew is the 10th child.
Did you ever wonder about your sanity? Did it ever get to the point sometimes that...
Well, I was glad I had a lock on my bathroom door. And go in there and be quiet.
But you probably had older children and help you out too, did they not?
Well...
Or not?
And Bruce was a very responsible guy, my oldest son, from the time he was little. not help so much with the other children. He helped a lot around the house doing things. My oldest daughter kind of helped a lot with the twins because she was enough older. And Mark, I think she used to kind of lead him into the woods. She was a nature girl anyway. She loved being in the woods. And but not, they didn't really do housework. I mean, they had chores, yes. I mean, they were all responsible for their own room. Even when I had cleaning help, I did not have the cleaning help do their rooms. They were supposed to change their beds and take care of their rooms. I mainly wanted clean bathrooms and, and as we got into this house, I had regular help because
did you pack them school lunches?
No. When they were at Erskine, they had a hot lunch program, which most of the children at Erskine ate there. I don't think they allowed kids to come home. I think you had to eat at the school. There was a school lunch, and then that was all the way through. I think if they wanted to, they could take a sack lunch if they didn't think they liked the food, but I never encouraged it.
Did you have a lot of scrapes and bruises that your husband had to patch up then?
Well, there were some, yeah. And
would your husband, would he doctor them, or was that
if it
not
was
allowed?
something that it wasn't a major serious thing, yes.
Were they very active in school activities?
Oh yeah, they were all. Each one has different interests, but they were all very active, I'd say.
Now, somebody with that many kids would be called a soccer mom, but you probably didn't have to.
They didn't even have soccer in the schools in those days.
Didn't have soccer, nor did you have a car to drive them around,
yes.
did you?
Yeah, I had a car.
Did you find yourself taking them to a lot of school
activities?
activities?
Oh, my goodness, I wish you'd see my carpool schedules. I should say so. We had I had learned to drive when I was in high school because my mother insisted that I learn how to drive, but I didn't have a car of my own. But the years we were in D.C., we didn't have a car. And so when we came back to Cedar Rapids, I felt the need to take another driver's training course. And I did that was available at Washington because I felt the responsibility of driving children in a car. I didn't want,
who had priority? What children? I don't imagine you played favorites to any of them.
What do you mean?
Who had to, if there was a crisis, who had to be?
Well, I can't think of any reason. They're different ages, for one thing, so I can't think of anything happening that would make a problem there, and it would be worked out. When you're in carpools, you have other drivers, so I wasn't driving all the time.
Okay.
I had a station wagon for so many years that I got to the point I said, if I ever see another station wagon, I didn't want another one. I was tired of it. And I was not just driving my children; I was driving other people's children too, because that's.
I would think open house at school would be a problem because first you had to go to one, you another, you're missing out.
Exactly, that was when they were in high school. Not so much in elementary because you go from grade to grade and visit, but in high school when you had to follow the student's schedule, and junior high too. When we got to the point we had 3 at Wash at one time, or when the twins were there, so we'd have to each juggle the schedules, and one would go to one's. Yeah, it was. In fact, when my last open house at Franklin, Mr. Muskimen, who was the director up there, got on the loudspeaker. I was so embarrassed, and he said, "Dr. and Mrs. Harris are here for their very last open house after." he told the number of years we'd been coming up there for. So it was
did any of your children have your love of music?
Oh yeah, several of my kids are professional. Well, 2 of them are professional musicians, and 2 others were music majors but are not professional musicians now. And most of them studied music of some kind.
Were the children close to each other growing up?
Well,
as close as they could be their age.
Yeah, depending on the age. And
what's some of your favorite memories when you think back now? Some of the times you wasn't so busy that you can really think back as a Christmases.
We probably had more of those now with our latest celebrations when they're adults. We had just in the year 2000 we had our 50th wedding anniversary, and that was a big celebration. The kids really did it. They insisted we have it and pretty much planned it. And that was It's fun when they're adults to see them together, to see that the kids that couldn't get along as children are close friends. That's nice.
Do they ever sit around and talk about the remember whens? And
Oh yes,
they get
yeah.
to talk about it.
We've learned things we didn't know at that time. Yes, they do. Yeah, and in that with that many, there are going to be some who are closer to each other than the others. I mean, it depends, and the age has a factor. I mean, Rebecca is 26, while her oldest brother will be 52 on his next birthday. So, that's a big... He was in college when she was born, but he did a pretty good job of trying to keep contact with her. He'd call her. He'd talk to her on the phone. So she knew she had a big brother, a telephone voice, but, she...
Were you and Percy strict with the kids? Or try to be strict?
We were stricter with... And I think ways of... we were pretty strict with Bruce, probably, about some things. The oldest one always gets the brunt of it. And, for example, we wouldn't let him drive the car he wanted to take his date, his double date, he wanted to take the date to the Lark restaurant for dinner before the...
closed.
Before the prom.
Oh.
And we didn't want him to drive on the highway. The next year, we had softened enough that a second son drove to Minneapolis for a rock concert. That's how much we changed it.
Did you have any who grew up in the hippie era in the 60s?
Yeah, of course, yes. Yeah. Bruce, as I said, graduated from high school in 69. Lileah was graduated in the early 70s, but they were all influenced by, it was the time of the Vietnam War and the way girls were dressing. I mean, she was... definitely an individualist, but she also happened to be a popular girl. She was pretty much a straight-A student. Lileah was very smart. And she did she was served on what Armstrong's department store had a fashion board. They would pick high school girls to serve on this fashion board, and they did a little retail selling. I mean, they had to clerk, but they also had fashion shows. And anyway, she was picked as a homecoming queen candidate and ended up being an attendant. And I thought she should have a nice suit, something conservative, a nice suit to wear, because I thought that's what you wore when you were. And she picked out an outfit from Armstrong's, but it was like I compared it to a Seminole Indian serape striped with a blanket or stole. And I said, well, that is. I said, the other girls probably won't be wearing anything like that. And she said, I know. I don't want to look like the other girl. So that's kind of how she was, but she was never it wasn't in a way that was disrespectful. She just had a mind of her own.
She was individualist. Yeah. Did you ever get tired of cooking?
Well, I never thought about it when they
at
were
that
home.
time.
No,
it was just something
I am now when they're just when you have
Yeah.
children who are hungry, you don't think about.
Did you insist that they all be around the table at mealtime, or was it
Well,
impossible?
often we ate before my husband came home because he would be working. Sometimes he would go to the hospital at night after he finished at the office. So we didn't always have, but usually, generally on Sundays and weekends we would have family meals.
Did you find a lot of times that you were raising the family by yourself, that your husband was so busy?
Well, he was gone
and
a lot. He
on
had,
call?
but it was necessary. And as I told you, I was a little bit conditioned for that because my dad had been a doctor, so I, didn't seem too strange to me.
How about taking kids for vacations? It probably was impossible to take the whole family, wouldn't it?
Well, we didn't have the money at first when he first
Yeah.
started practicing, but we did take some family trips. We finally we had some really nice trips. We drove, one year we took whoever was alive then. I guess the baby was Anne. And, as many as you can get in a station wagon. We left Anne with a friend because she was 2 years old. I think we didn't take her, but we drove out east. We wanted to go back to Washington, D.C. Wanted the kids to see the sights of Washington, D.C., where we'd lived.
Mm-hmm.
We took them to the big Rock Creek. We started at Rock Creek Park Zoo and then saw all the government buildings and monuments. And then we drove up to New England. We had a friend we wanted to visit up in New England, and including Jackson Burns, who was the minister at St. Paul's Church when we built the house and was instrumental in us having this house. He and his wife had a summer home up in Maine, so we went up to New England. But when we arrived at their place after and we kind of skirted New York. We didn't go into New York. But we had gone to Salem that day to the witch, looked at the witch houses and so on. So we always joke about that. But a storm came up. They were in the country in the mountains up there, and she had planned to have a cookout. She had the grill going and making hamburgers. And anyway, the storm came up, and she and I were rushing to carry everything into the house. And I guess they thought I got a jolt of lightning, but I fell and broke my ankle. And so it was an area where there was a lot of water skiing accidents, kind of a resort area. And they took me to this little hospital that was really like a big house, big spread out house. I don't think it had 2 stories, but anyway, I was kept in the hospital overnight and had a broken bone. And my husband would not tell them that he was a doctor. It was so irritating because they were doing such stupid, he just didn't want to say he was a doctor. But arrangements were made for me to fly back by myself because of and a friend of ours here, Dick Selichek, who was a surgeon, met me at the airport, and they took me over to Mercy, and they kept me at Mercy until my family got back. I don't know if you could do that now with the way the health HMOs. But I mean, I wasn't really sick, but I just couldn't. I had a broken bone, and they just said, well, you can stay over at Mercy till your family gets back.
You were contacted by the Maytag Corporation that made the abortion.
They had somebody knew about our family. They had for a while. They were taking doing ads with large families. That was during that period, and they'd never used the black family, and I can't remember who it was, but someone who knew of our family or knew my husband. Maybe it was a patient of his. Told them about us down in Newton, and they were interested, and that was the picture there was taken. They sent in an ad agency that did their pictures from Chicago. Leo Burnett, big time company. They came in with everything, and took a whole lot of pictures. But that's the one they used in the ad.
Did they give you a new wash machine or a year's
supply?
They
gave me a choice. They gave us a choice of taking $1,000 or the top of the line washer and dryer. And I took a top of the line washer and dryer because that meant I had 2 of each. And I could go down in the basement and load them both up. Because I had a little laundry net. I've always had 2 machines ever since.
Where did the kids, they all go to the same high school?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which
Washington.
Washington High School. Did you become very active in school or school activities?
Not when they were in Catholic school, the first couple of years, but when they were... that in itself is a story, the reason they transferred. But when they started going to Polk school, I was very involved. I was, with PTA and chaired they had a study group then, that type of thing. So I was always active in PTA, and then later on at Erskine, I served as president of PTA at Erskine, and I served as president of PTA at Washington.
Did any of your children excel in sports? Were they interested in sports?
They tried to. Coach King didn't play them very much. My twins were very athletic. I mean, they love sports. They still do. But they're 5'7", 5'8", and Philip got to play. They both were playing basketball. Philip got to play more than Paul. Paul became quite a good baseball player, but Philip, the coach, was that Pinky Primrose? And I'm not sure. Anyway. He didn't feel that the coach was going to play him that much, and they always worked in the summer, and they had worked at the gas company, and my husband was a doctor for the gas company, and that helped him get jobs there, laying pipe, that type of thing, but it paid very well. So Philip worked that last summer before they finished high school, I guess. It wasn't, they were going to go, I think they still had their senior year. Paul played baseball, but then Paul played at the University of Chicago all through. And he got an award when he graduated, the Amos Alonzo Stagg Award at the University of Chicago, which was for a scholar who was also a fine athlete. He had both good grades and was also a good baseball player.
Did you find yourself with the empty nest syndrome finally after they all left home?
Well, it was a long time before that happened.
Did you?
I think what helped me the most, it would have been when Rebecca left, my baby. if I'd had no one around, it would have been very hard at that point. But she went to school at Iowa. She was in Iowa City, so she wasn't that far away. And even though I didn't see her, we talked on the phone a lot. We still do. She's teaching now for Teach for America in California, but she often calls me as she's commuting. She has to drive from Compton to Santa Monica each day, and she calls us at least once a week, sometimes often. Yeah.
Did you ever go back to get your degree?
Yes, I did. I got it. It'll be almost 10 years now.
How old were you when you decided to go? Why did you decide to go back? It's something
just because I started studying Russian, and I started studying Russian at Co. Just
Why?
Interested in, because I like foreign language, and I had a chance to take a course, and at first I started off and on. I would take college courses just because I was interested, to keep my mind out of something to do other than change diapers. And public television offered a course called Russian Language and People, and so you watched the television show, and you had to take the test out at Kirkwood. So that was a smattering of Russian language. And when that course ended, the woman that supervised the test and we had to write a term paper. The woman that read my term paper knew that I was really interested in more language than I was getting from that course. That was more like travel Russian. And she said, I'm going to be teaching a course at Co next year. She said, if you're interested, it'll be an evening course and you'll get college credit. It'll be, it's only going to meet 2 nights a week, but they're going to be 2-hour classes, so it'll be 4 hours of college credit. And I wasn't really interested in the college credit, but I thought I had loved Russian music when I was studying piano and Russian culture. I was interested in the Russian Orthodox Church. There were just many things, and a little interested in the politics and knowing more about communism and stuff, but it was more the cultural parts of. And so I took the course at Co, but Co decided it wasn't a money-making thing for them, and they dropped it after a year and a half. And actually, they didn't start it in the fall. They started it in the middle of the year because not enough people signed up for it in the fall. So I had technically a year and a half at Co. And then I just was going to let it go because I didn't. This same woman called me, Elizabeth Gillen is her name, and she was trying to convince me that I should go to Iowa. And I said, well, I don't drive on the highway. I said, once in a while I pick someone up at the airport, but that's about it. I am not a highway driver. And I looked into going down to Cornell because that's closer. And I had studied piano during my off and on, mainly for a few months I studied with Julian Byrne when he was teaching down there. And, it's a short drive. But Cornell had started the one course at a time thing, and the Russian was very intensive. I mean, you're immersed in it. And they said, well, you probably could do it, but the students are here on campus, and that's all they do. They eat, breathe, and think Russian for that period. And anyway, I just decided to let it go, and we had a trip planned to Cleveland to visit our son out there and with his family. And when I came back, she called me again, and I know I'm taking too long with this answer, but she said, call Dr. Parrott, the head of the department, and talk to him. So I called down there, and even though school had started at Iowa in August, and it was October by then, and I talked to the secretary, Nellie, who happened to be the wife of one of the Russian professors and was Russian. And I never did talk to Dr. Parrott, but she said, well, she said, come down and you'd be in second year, you'd be in Dr. Kit Wirtz's class, Dr. Wirtz, and he's a wonderful teacher. And she said, why don't you just come down and talk to him and sit in on his class and see how you feel? So I did, and I was making signs of the crosses and saying prayers on the highway that I could get.
They're safe.
I was so nervous. You can't believe how nervous I was.
Between driving on the highway and taking Russian.
My husband never could understand. He said, as much as you drive these kids around this town, he couldn't understand why I was so nervous about the highway. But anyway, so Kit, everybody called him Kit, Professor Wirtz, let me sit in on his class, and I took a quiz even the first day. He gave a little quiz, and I did fairly well. It wasn't, but the way he taught it was so much better, so far superior to the way it had been taught at Co. And but he thought I could be. He said, "I think you'll be comfortable here. You'll catch on." So it was a second year class, so I really start it all over again in a way. But
So how many years did you commute then to Iowa?
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah, because I didn't plan to get a degree. I just was taking Russian for fun. And my husband was on the Board of Regents then too, so I had a little clout. I could do what I wanted to. But I did that for 2 years, just to study Russian. And then my advisor, who was interested in me as a non-traditional student, and started talking to me. She'd look at my transcript, and she said, "You've got so much college credit. Why don't you just put it together and finish?" You know, because I'd had a course here and a course there, and 2 years at Iowa State Teachers, and I was concerned about whether I really had time to do that. And I had Rebecca, my baby, was in junior high. I mean, she wasn't exactly a little baby, but I had to think about it. But I ended up just picking up a course here and a course there.
Did your family give you a lot of moral support?
Well, there was no one here then except my Grant. Was
What
still
year
in
did
high
you
school.
get your
it'll be 93.
93?
Yeah.
And you got a degree? At what age?
I was born in 1931.
Was
You figure.
Well, you're very proud. I'm sure you're very proud of yourself that you had the
Well, I think they were proud of me, and
Yeah.
I realized I had a lot of nice letters from women who were somewhat inspired by
Yes.
the fact that I'd done it, and several said this was the kind of they'd always wanted to finish, and I think maybe a few people were.
Did you ever get so you could speak Russian?
I could when I was
fairly
studying.
fluently?
Yeah, well, I don't know. To be fluent is when you're not thinking about it and speak it like your native language, but I spoke it. The problem is I was finished with my Russian, the 4 years of Russian, and still had some required courses to take. So at the tail end, I wasn't taking Russian, except I did go sit in on conversation classes just to keep it in my head. But I had taken all the required Russian courses, but I still had to go back and pick up a course like interpretation of literature, where I had a 25-year-old TA teaching. You know, you felt like you knew more than the teacher sometimes. And then I had to take a science course. You had to have a science course at the lab. So since I love plants and flowers, I took botany, and which was almost my nemesis, because I ended up in a class with a bunch of science majors, and there was a lot of chemistry, and I'd forgotten my chemistry from high school. I petitioned out of the calculus math requirement. They had added that, and the committee concluded that at the time I'd graduated from high school, I had prepared for what was then college requirements, and I had a friend help me write a little essay on why there was no way I needed calculus in the rest of my life for anything. So they didn't make me take it. If I'd had to take, actually, I went out to Kirkwood and took to review my algebra, just in case I did have to take it, and I did quite well. I was a good algebra student in junior high and high school, but I hated geometry. I never did like geometry. But anyway.
Did you ever have the opportunity to travel to Russia?
Yes, we took a trip in 1990 when I was had just started at Iowa, really, but I wasn't. It was an opportunity. My husband used to get brochures for doctors called, it was called professional meetings, and he didn't want to go, and he doesn't like to go anywhere where they have strange food. He always worries about the food, and of course they didn't. They were struggling there, but. I showed it to him because I thought it would be interesting to him, because in each city he would have medical meetings and visit hospitals and talk to other doctors, and so that appealed to him. And we went the last summer of communism.
Did you find that you could understand quite a bit what people
I was
were
the only.
talking
Well,
about?
we were only 10 in our group. We met our group in New York City. We didn't even know who would be in our group. And it turned out I was the only person that spoke any Russian, which made me very popular. When we'd go to the hospitals, I wasn't proficient in Russian, but I could speak enough to get by. And you know, the doctors in Russia were mostly women, except for the top surgeons and the specialists. So as soon as they found out I was a mother of 12 children and was speaking Russian, they loved me. You know, and also in Russia, it was considered a luxury to have a big family. The housing was so bad there, you know, so tight. And they really envied somebody that could have a big family. And when we got to our hotel in Moscow, too, our luggage wasn't delivered to our room. and I was the one that had to talk to the baggage guys. He took me down to the baggage room, and they're very friendly. The people are very friendly, and one of the maids brought her little grandchild up to meet me when we were there. So we had a great experience. We didn't have any really seriously unpleasant things happen at all.
Could we test your proficiency in the Russian language?
No.
Like a phrase.
Что это вы хотите, что...
What is that?
I didn't finish the sentence. I started out by saying, what do you want me to say? Что это... I've forgotten a lot because I'm not using it. For a while I was keeping up conversation.
Is there anybody in the Cedar Rapids area of Russian descent that you could
yeah, there are a lot of
converse
Russian
with?
people here. I have a young woman who's in her, she's almost, I guess Larissa's almost 40 now, but her husband is a young man who went to Russia to study Russian, and they married. His name is Elif. They live out near Shueyville, actually, out in the country. But she, for a while I was doing conversation with her, but when we're together now we always speak English most of the time. So.
Was this a more recent picture?
Right, this is the most recent picture, I think, that we have with everybody on it, all the kids, not their wives and so on, but this is all our kids.
What are
taken
the
in our
children?
backyard.
What are the children doing today, and whereabouts are they living?
Well, the oldest child is getting pretty old, but he's an attorney, and he's in New Jersey.
That's Bruce?
Yes, Bruce. Bruce lives near Morris. He lives in a little town called Chatham, New Jersey. He had another career before that. He was with New England Bell, and then when he graduated from Amherst, and then got his MBA while he was in Boston, and then went down to AT&T in New Jersey, and he just became dissatisfied with the way things were going at AT&T. They were having problems, so he went back to law school. He's been a lawyer since 1992, I guess.
And the next one?
The next one is David, who is a Harvard Law graduate, but doesn't practice law. He works for a computer company. It's complicated. I don't understand. He just says basically he's a programmer, but he lives in Framingham, near Boston. He graduated from Harvard Law School, but he's never practiced. The next one is Lileah. My oldest daughter is a pathologist, and I think she wanted to be a doctor from the time she was little. She lives in Houston. And the next one is Peter, who is a musician, professional musician, really concentrating more on composing and arranging now. But he used to be on the road with some pretty well-known groups like Bruce Hornsby and Chuck Mangione and so on. The next one is the twins were born after Peter, and they're both attorneys. Philip lives in Chicago and Paul lives in the Cleveland area. The next one is Mark, and Mark is a musician and lives in California, lives in the Los Angeles area. After Mark is Anne. Anne was also a violinist and had a music degree from Yale, but she got into retail business when she finished college, into a training program with a big department store, and she's been in with various stores, but she's now a vice president for diversity with the May Company, which happens to own a lot of stores in this country. It was 470, but I think they just let go some of the stores west of the Mississippi. I'm not quite sure how many there are now, but works in St. Louis, and lives and has her family in Columbus, Ohio. The next one is Sarah, who is graduated from McAllister up in St. Paul as a psychology major, but she's now has become in the last couple of years the artistic director for a place that called Patrick's Cabaret. They do have young artists who don't have names for themselves yet come in and do. They can be musicians, they could be poetry readings, that type of thing. So she loves her job. And then Matthew is the next boy, and he was in law school and almost finished law school, but he decided he didn't want to be a lawyer. So he's also up in Minnesota right now working. And I think he has a job right now with an HMO, but I don't know if that's the end for him. He writes. That's what he really wants to be, as a writer. And the next boy, the youngest boy, is Grant, who was a trumpet player and a very good one and graduated from Northwestern. But he is playing some in New Orleans. He lives in New Orleans, but his main job and livelihood comes from working for a computer company. And the youngest one is Rebecca. She finished at Iowa too, and then got a master's at Indiana, but decided she wanted to have be in the real world for a while. She had considered a PhD, but she's joined a program called Teach for America, and she's teaching fourth graders in Compton, California. This is her second year. So that's it. I don't remember what year it was. It's about 6 years ago, I think.
In this picture here, Lileah?
It was taken. Each family group had a picture. Could take a picture of their family, and this has all of our family, and then a couple of friends are on the picture too. But
did you have the opportunity to get together for Percy's 75th birthday?
all but two came home for that.
Was that this summer?
Mm-hmm. No, it was in September, right after Labor Day, or Labor Day weekend. His birthday is September 4th.
Of course, there's so many of them now, there's no way they can all stay in your home one day.
Well, they're coming, 7 of them are coming for Thanksgiving, and I tell you, I wish that 2 of them finally decided to stay at the hotel, but, and a friend has offered me her home, a friend of mine, a close friend who's visiting her daughter in Seattle, said we could use, but they don't want to do that. They don't want to go to someone else's house, and so we'll probably have sleeping bags in the living room.
You must feel very blessed to have a family of that size and have them healthy.
Yeah, I
and
surely
have them
do.
all educated with a good job. Why do you suppose that is? Because of your faith?
I hope.
Your strong faith?
Yeah, I think so, but I doubt if anybody in my family agrees with me.
I'll bet that took a lot of rosaries over all of those years.
Well, I'm not a big rosary prayer, but I do pray. When I had my MRI, I was saying Hail Marys on my finger. But no, I think we're blessed, and I think that does come from God. And although my husband is not, he's really a Methodist. He's not Catholic, but
you had to make up for both of you.
well, Catholics are good people too. I mean, Methodists are good people too.
Yes, they are.
Actually, my mother was Methodist before she became Catholic. So, yeah, my parents converted to Catholicism when I was little.
Lileah, unless you have any more memories to share with us, the Linn County Historical Society, the Cedar Rapids History Center, would like to thank you very much for sharing your memories with us.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I had the opportunity. I know there are lots more memories, but maybe I'll write a book. Too many to get in.
With your knowledge of music, would you play a little piece for us to close out this interview?
Well, I'll try. I'm an out of practice musician.
Go ahead.